Good morning, everybody. Wow, lots of people here. You all decided to be here this morning. I am grateful for that. Let's start this webinar. My name is Marco. I'm calling in from our Amsterdam office. Nick, can you put on the notes? I'm calling in from our Amsterdam office. It's beautiful to all have you here. Can you put on the notes? We'll talk about biomimicry for today. So this is a webinar in a streak. We've had a beautiful streak. We've had a talk about Tech of China. We've had a talk about GPT-3. We've had a talk about future communication methods. 2 weeks ago, we had a talk about sustainable energy. And today we're talking about biomimicry. So biomimicry is the Nick. I do have notes. Thanks. All right. Here we go. Here are the notes. So biomimicry today. Biomimicry is an awesome field of research that we'll be talking about today. And it is the research where we talk about being in a brilliant planet and that we are surrounded by geniuses already. We should always keep in mind that organisms and ecosystems that we know live gracefully here on this planet. And this is something to remember and to never forget again. So biomimicry is this discipline that tries to learn from those geniuses that we already have and take advice from them. So it's actually the question, how would nature solve things that we face in this world? But first, I want to take you back to 2009. Before we dive into this webinar, this is Jenny Benyus. She's a biologist at the University of Montana, and she's an author and a self-proclaimed nature nerd. And she's not the inventor of the time biomimicry, but she certainly popularized it. She's the author of the book Biomimicry, Innovation Inspired by Nature. And at the TED Talk that you see a picture of here, she talks about how we forgot about the beautiful solutions nature has for things. She talks about wasp nests and the fact that we as humans are not the first ones to produce cellulose. We're actually not the first to make paper. We're not the first to try to optimize packaging space or to waterproof stuff. We're not the first to try and heat and cool stuff. And we're not the first to actually build houses for our young. So biomimicry in their nature is really good and stuff. And the work that Dr. Benyus has done is really influential. And if you go fast forward to today, we have this new field called generative design. It's a new field within artificial intelligence. And generative design creates structures that are optimized for given metrics. That can be strengths, that can be material usage. It can also be packaging or waterproofing materials. It can even be heat, cooling. And this new technology is being used by Airbus, for example, to redesign their partition wall. And this is a wall between passengers in the kitchen. And this wall used to weigh 65 kilograms. But by using a computer-generated design, they were able to cut the weight by about 45%. While maintaining the strength requirements that they had. And Airbus is able to save loads of kilograms of fuel per plane per year. And if you want to know how many, my colleague Pepijn will tell you more on that later. And what I'm trying to tell here is that Professor Benyus is an inventor in biomimicry. And the Airbus team right here used biomimicry for innovation. And that is why I believe that innovation is an invention with a business case. And as we are here on a distance today, I think we are with some good innovators. And I believe that you and all the people around you, your teams, your companies, have the ability to aspire things that actually can pull the world forward. And what you need, though, are enablers to fast you forward into that future. And I believe that inventions, and in particular technological inventions, can enable aspirations that you and your teams have. So today we will introduce you to some mind-blowing technologies where we use nature as our teacher. And I believe that these technologies are really important and hardly needed because about 40% of the world's population live at coastal areas. But this is, for example, in a time where sea levels have risen 11 centimeters in the 20th century, but it is expected to rise another half a meter or a meter this century. And that is in a time where 1/3 of the world's population is affected by fresh water scarcity. We are now living in a time where every hour the sun beams enough solar energy onto Earth to supply our planet with electricity for the entire year. And we need to start dealing with these things. And we also need to start dealing, for example, with the aging population, because for the first time, there are more people over 65 than there are children younger than 5. Every day, approximately 8 million pieces of plastics find their way into our oceans. 39% of all habitable land on Earth is used for meat. Average wildlife populations have dropped 60% in just over 40 years. More than 1 million species are at risk of extinction by climate change. And the 20 warmest years on Earth have recorded in the past 22 years. Climate change is real, people. So these are just some facts, some truths about the world that we live in. And that's complicated. Take a moment to breathe. I think the reason that we are here in a distance today is that we're in the middle of a drastic change. And I think the pandemic is just part of that change. But we must also simply acknowledge that the world of gradual and predictable change is a thing of the past. We live in this era of epic change and a time where exponential technologies cause things to change at hair-raising speeds. And everything in this world is hyper-connected. And we are hyper-connected to the world that we live in. So the reason why we wanted to present this topic today is because I think now more than ever, every person and every company should explore their future. So why this topic today, biomimicry? Well, because we believe it's important to look at the nature and what we can learn from them. And today we've selected inventions to share with you that we think might enable a significant innovation in this world. So typically when we work with clients, we define their aspirations, we then discover valuable inventions, and then we can see how we can enable these aspirations. And if we find technologies, we plot them on what we call the maturity wave. And here technologies can go from science fiction, where we can imagine a future, but crucial pieces of the puzzle are still missing. Then technologies go into lab prototypes, where we see scientists actually working on them. Then they go into first applications, where you see startups and the technology being out in the world for real, to then become potential unlocked and having real business cases, and eventually things become mainstream adopted. So Pepijn will tell you more about the technologies in a second. The things that we found and the things that we'll share today are just several inventions that we have seen in biomimicry, yet don't fall in a trap of thinking that all these solutions are for your company too. That would be solutions looking for a problem. Rather than that, you want to have problems that are looking for a solution. And we are firm believers that it's even better to have opportunities that are looking for an enabling technology. So the day today, we'll have 60 minutes. There will be 45 minutes of talk. The chat is moderated for questions. There will be no breaks. Tomorrow you will have an email with a recording of this session. At the end, we'll be having a Q&A. You can post all your questions in the chat. If there are questions we don't have an answer in right along, then we'll also publish a blog post. And in that blog post, we'll answer all the questions that we've got. A little bit regarding COVID. We're still in it a little bit. I hope things will change soon. But regarding COVID, our gear is disinfected. We've washed our hands. The crew has mouth caps on. We're keeping a distance. Also during the Q&A. And with that being said, let's dive into emerging technologies that are enabled by biomimicry. Next up is Pepijn. Pepijn, good to have you here, man.
Thank you, Marco. I'm very excited to be here and honored to be here to do this webinar for you. And if you have to leave now, I don't hope that's the case, but if you have to leave now, I want you to know that planet Earth is the most successful innovator we have ever seen. And today I will tell you why and how this is the case. So first, let's go back to the 60s, to Japan. Japan was the first country in the world to surprise the world with bullet trains. These trains were extremely fast, but they also made an incredible noise when they left the tunnel. This is called a sonic boom due to the air, to too much air resistance due to the shape of the train. So what did Japan decided? They decided to redesign the train in the 90s. And one of the engineers in the team was a bird watcher. And he noticed something special about kingfishers, small birds living next to water. When kingfishers dive into the water, they almost do not splash. So he assumed that it had to do with the shape of the bird's head. And what they actually did, they took the kingfisher as a leading model for the redesign of the train. Now, this is what happened. The bullet trains look like this right now, and no more sonic boom. Today I will talk to you about biomimicry, mimicking nature's strategies to solve human design challenges. I think Marco just pointed to you how important this can be to you, but to stress a bit more of the relevance to you, let's take a look at this example. This is Jeff Bezos, founder of CEO, and his quote is, "Our success at Amazon is a function of how many experiments we do per year, per month, per week, and per day." Amazon is often used as an example as a business that's very innovative, maybe the most innovative company in the world. But Amazon exists only for 25 years now, give or take. When we look at life on Earth, it exists for 3.5 billion years already. That means 3.5 billion years of experimenting as well. Looking at the numbers, it shows as well. 99.9% of all species ever existed are extinct right now, and only 0.1% were able to deal with disruption and still live. So my question for today is, are you ready for disruption? And are you ready to become the 0.1%? A little bit about myself before we dive into the content. Why am I doing this? Well, first of all, fascination. I've been fascinating with wildlife and animals since I'm a very young boy. I mimicked nature when I was young already. Here you see me dressed up as a tiger. Was one of my hobbies when I was young. My father is a biologist. I know he's watching. Hi, Dad. Well, second to that, I have a passion for technology and innovation, pushing the status quo, as we like to say at BIT. And thirdly, and this one is very important, I firmly believe that nature and innovation have a lot to offer to each other and can help each other thrive in the future. That's very important, and I firmly believe that. So what's in it for you today? I want to make you as excited about biomimicry as I am and show you its huge potential. And when you walk out of here, I want you to understand how biomimicry can fast forward your business future. So what will we do today? As Marco just showed you, we researched several technologies in the field of biomimicry. Unfortunately, I will not have time to highlight them all to you. So we do only 3. Data storage with DNA, swarm logic, and generative design. I start at the right, so start with a lab prototype and work towards the left, meaning we end with a technology that is already out there and has its value proven. So what are the lessons I would like to learn today, or what nature can learn us, better mentioned? Well, the first one is use DNA structures to store data. The second one is learn from birds to improve autonomy. And the third one is design by Darwin's principles. Let's start with the first one. You need to know that we live in an era in which we go from gut feeling decision making to data-driven decision making. And this is extremely exciting, and it enriches our capacity to make optimal decisions big time. It enables, for instance, efficiency. You can think about data-driven aviation, in which airlines, airports, and luggage handlers share data with each other. You can think of faster deliveries and a higher at-home ratio of customers that receive the orders. You can think about more efficient logistics by providing real-time insights on stock and supply chain. You can think about comfort and connectivity in our offices, in our houses, in our public transport. And you can even think about connected cities. Toyota is doing a very enormous lab experiment right now in Japan. It's called the Woven City, in which humans, vehicles, and infrastructure are connected through data. And the list goes on and on and on. We generate a lot of data. But when you generate data, you also have to store this data. And this is a challenge that is already present, and this challenge will grow in the future. So what we currently do to store data, we use data centers. Here you see one next to our home base at Startup Village. And as you can see, these data centers are quite big. What you also should know is that data centers use a lot of energy. They consume a lot of energy. And to illustrate a bit to you, to get a bit more of a grasp on how this would work or how this works, I would like to take you to the Wieringermeerpolder. The Netherlands built the biggest windmill park on land in Europe, consisting of 81 windmills. And these 81 windmills would have the capacity to provide 370,000 households with energy. However, this is not the case. It is used to provide one Microsoft data center with energy. And this Microsoft data center is as big as 40 football fields. That is a lot of energy, and that is a lot of space. When we look into the future, we see a future coming towards us in which we start or keep generating more data and keep storing more data. For instance, we send each other 65 billion WhatsApp messages every day. We do 3.5 billion Google searches each day, and the autopilot function on Tesla outdriven the 3 million miles. These are all data that need to be stored. I mentioned the energy and the space. There's a third aspect to keep in mind, and that's the fact that storing data in these volumes is very expensive. We're looking at an incredible number I cannot even pronounce on extra storage costs on an annual base. And to make it a bit more tangible to you, that means 22 million euros per person every year if we would divide it over the total world population right now. It's crazy. But nature already invented the most efficient data center we can imagine. So there is help from nature, actually. So what's the case? Researchers at, amongst others, IBM and Microsoft were able to store data in DNA. And by this, I do not mean your DNA, Marco's DNA, or my DNA, but I mean synthesized DNA that is printed in a lab. However, this synthesized DNA has the exact same features and characteristics as human DNA. So it is actual DNA. How would it work? How does it work? Very brief. You need to sequence DNA. DNA consists of 4 letters, A, G, C, and T. And each letter represents a binary code, 00, 01, 10, or 11. These are actually data codes. And to translate the DNA back to data, you need a decoding algorithm to actually make the data workable again, because the 0 and 1s is the language, so to say, our technology speaks and can work with. Well, this technology is still a prototype, meaning it will take 10 to 20 years before it becomes mainstream, but it is extremely promising. It could be so effective that we could store all the world's data in a space comparable to only one room in the future. And that is massive, especially when you think of all the data centers I just mentioned and the size and the energy they consume. So why is DNA so effective in doing this? Why is DNA so special? Well, DNA is extremely dense. It has the capacity to store a lot of energy in a very small space. DNA is very durable. We're the living proof of that. And also the fossils we find nowadays containing DNA are a proof of that. And DNA is very efficient. It uses very few energy to store actual information. So DNA is special because of its density, its durability, and its efficiency. When we look at current cost to actually leverage this technology, it is still expensive. It is about 1 million euros right now to store 1 terabyte, for instance. However, the outlook is that In 30 years from now, it will cost only €1 to store 1 terabyte with DNA. And we've seen a similar price drop with other technologies. For instance, lithium-ion batteries, which are used for electric cars. They were quite pricey in the early 90s. Almost 3 decades later, we have seen a price drop of 98%. The expectation is that DNA storage, the price drop will even be steeper. And another sign that is really important to keep in mind is that there's a lot of research and development going on, and investments as well. So there is a data storage alliance right now since last year. You see Microsoft and Western Digital from the software developing side, and on the other hand, Illumina and Twist Bioscience as biotech parties. They together form this alliance, and they have a combined revenue of $160 billion. So it's quite a serious alliance to keep an eye on. And this might raise the question for you, okay, if parties like Microsoft are developing in tech like this that I can buy off the shelf or I can outsource to Microsoft later, why would I keep an eye on developing something like this myself? Well, there are certain things to keep in mind when it comes to storing your data in-house. For instance, you keep in control of your data. You keep compliant. Compliance is a growing challenge for companies, especially with GDPR legislations that are stricter and stricter, and you remain flexible as a company. Current advantages to outsource data, so to have a third party storing your data, such as Microsoft, are mainly have to do with equipment and scaling problems. As you just saw, data centers are very big. Companies do not want to pay for that. Well, these advantages diminish when DNA to store data will be there. So that is something to consider. And a third thing to consider, and this one is very important, is that if you want to become data-driven as a company and you want to outsource it, it would mean that you put mission-critical data into the hands of third parties. This can sound a bit abstract or vague still, but I'll give you an example on how this could work. Coolblue is an e-commerce party in the Netherlands. I think you know them. And what they currently do, they store their data. They have the data stored by Amazon Web Services, which is obviously part of Amazon. Well, Amazon is also an e-commerce party and is entering the Dutch market right now. So Amazon is a growing competitor of Coolblue, while Coolblue stores its operational and mission-critical data at their web services. It's something to consider and to keep an eye on, because it's definitely a growing challenge. First lesson: use DNA structures to store data. Let's go to the second. Learn from birds to improve autonomy. What I would like you to know is we go from a hands-on to a hands-off society. More and more operational, day-to-day and manual tasks can be executed with technology. And autonomous technology in specific is a very big enabler of this. When we think of technologies, we can think about self-driving cars, for instance, but also about self-driving groceries. So this autonomy is a robot car designed by Albert Heijn in Eindhoven. And this car can actually deliver your groceries up to your own doorstep. The technology is promising, but there are still some feasibility concerns. It is difficult to become completely autonomous. Sometimes they end up like this. You also see this when you look at the Tesla case. Tesla was very bold in promising this five levels of automation, going to full automation in a rapid pace. And you see now over the years that they start stepping back a bit, coming back a bit from that promise. So they are still talking about full automation, but they do not present it as highly visible anymore on their website. And even Elon Musk, CEO of Tesla, admitted that it was exaggerated a bit when it came to becoming fully autonomous of Tesla. So promising technology, difficult to actually execute perfectly. When we look into the Dutch context, we see a country that is very crowded, especially in the Randstad. And we see an infrastructure that is challenging. So we have narrow streets, narrow alleys and canals. When we translate it to numbers, we have 416 people living per square kilometer. Makes us the most densely populated country in Europe, except from 3 micro-states. And we also have almost 9 million vehicles registered. So those are the challenges. On the lower part, you see our opportunity, because we are very connected. We are the #1 in connectivity in Europe, and we're the #4 in overall digitization in Europe. And how you should see this, it means that we have a very good technical foundation, technical infrastructure, to actually improve our autonomous technologies and have autonomous cars, self-driving cars, thrive in the future. When we take a closer look at technology itself, you see a lot of technologies already added to cars. For instance, a very important one is LiDAR technology, light sensors. That's what it means. And it can be seen as the vision of a car, even in bad weather. It gives the car circumstantial awareness, and it can assess how far objects are away from the car itself. Technologies such as LiDAR and other radars can be seen as the bottom layer of the pyramid of Maslow when it comes to autonomous driving. When you look at more of a bigger picture, you see that global autonomous vehicle registration is rising. It's growing explosively, to be honest. In 2030, so in less than 10 years from now, we expect it to be 12%. That means more than 1 out of 10 cars will be autonomous in 9 years from now. That is a lot. And obviously, we do not want this to happen, so collision. So we'll need to find a way to have all these cars working smoothly together as a collective. And there's good news, we are working on this. So this is what 3051 drones look like, launched at once in a swarm. So a different type of vehicle, but they are operating in a swarm as a collective. And this was actually a world record set by a Chinese tech company last year in 2020. There is, however, a small bummer, and that's that birds are the true record holder when it comes to autonomous swarms. Keep the 3051 in mind, and behold, there were 1.5 billion birds ever recorded in one swarm, operating perfectly without collisioning, and they can actually fly quite big distances without colliding. So that is very interesting, and we should ask ourselves, what can we learn from birds here to improve our own autonomous dream, so to say? Researchers found out that an important lesson we can learn is the nearest neighbor principle. I will explain shortly to you what it is. Well, when birds are flying in a flock, in a swarm, they focus on their nearest neighbor or neighbors only. So they are not focusing on 1 billion other birds. They only focus on the birds surrounding them. What also happens is flock centering. This means they keep a minimum boundary distance between each other while sticking together. And they determine their relative position in comparison to each other to avoid collisions. The third thing they do is they match their velocity with their neighbors as well. So every bird is only looking at its own neighbors to do exactly those things. And when you look at the total swarm, then it operates perfectly. Well, Honda took this principle in for their own autonomous cars, and it actually worked. You see a car here on the lower part entering a lane, and it determines its position perfectly and merges into a swarm, adapts its speed and its position to become one and do not collide. What is interesting to know is that if we look into the future, technologies like these become more relevant because we go from moving on the ground to moving in the air as well. For instance, to deliver packages with drones or have emergency services operating autonomously by drones, as you see in the picture right here. And a second development you should know is that we're going to transport people through the air as well. Last week, the first car ever was launched, as you can see here in the picture, and made its first intercity trip. That's quite cool, and it's also something to keep in mind. So we go on the ground and we go into the air as well, And that's why we should definitely learn from birds to improve our autonomous technology. That was the second lesson. Now let's go to the third one. Design by Darwin's principles. What I would like you to know is that the first two lessons, using DNA to store your data and learn from birds to improve autonomy, are technologies that are not there yet. They are a bit further away in the maturity wave, lab prototype of first applicants. Designing by Darwin's principles is a technology that is already proven value. It's executed well, and it is definitely something you could start working yourself with as well. Marco mentioned it already, but Airbus saved a lot of kerosene. They saved 3,000 kilograms of kerosene per year per plane by a redesign they did of the A320 in 2016. Marco mentioned as well, they redesigned the partition, not a very special part at first glance, just a gray rectangular thing in between chairs. Still, lots of impact. So how did they do this? Well, they used the theory of natural selection, or a technology that is based on the theory of natural selection. And this is actually the way nature experiments and selects species to survive. It has three important premises. It has the law or the premise of broad numbers. It has the premise of struggles to survive. And it has the premise of variation. And this theory is so widespread that kids all around the world get this taught in biology class. And translating this to the context of technology, we're talking about generative design. Generative design is an algorithm that determines numerous amounts of designs, potential designs, given certain specifications. So it sticks to a certain rule set, but it comes up with all the possible potential solutions then. And it uses the same principles as Darwin's evolution theory. And what is special about this technology is that it typically comes up with choices and designs engineers could not come up with. So it could not replace your engineers, but it could really assist your engineers in improving design solutions. For Airbus, it came down to a bionic design that resembles a lot to how bone structures actually grow. This was the end result. And although these guys do not look very happy, the impact on fuel consumption for Airbus was massive. So this is aviation. But when we look around us in the nowadays, well, city centers, for instance, we see a lot of other use cases in which we could use generative design. This is a big problem in the Netherlands right now. You see collapsing quays and canals. And to be honest, I cannot be surprised when I see cars like this driving around on the canals, like Land Rovers or Range Rovers, very heavy cars. And now you might think, yeah, well, who drives such a car in cities? Teslas are the future, you just told us. Well, Teslas are as heavy, mainly because of the batteries they have. So there's a challenge here. How can we design lighter cars? Well, you can do so with generative design. You can design cars that only weigh a few hundred kilos, and they do not have to look like this. They can look like this. Quite a cool car. This is the head rod. But you do not have to stick to weight when you want to redesign a car. Hyundai made a car, actually a walking car, that is able to access difficult spots or terrains. For instance, doorsteps. You see here a person entering the car that is in a wheelchair, or emergency situations. Quite cool as well. This is done by Hyundai, as I said. Other use case, prolapsing houses. This is as old as the fact that we build houses in the Netherlands due to the soil we have. And we have also a very old solution for it, which is pile driving, heipalen for the Dutch people here. However, the solution is expensive, it is intensive, and let's be honest, if you have ever lived next to a site like this, it's extremely annoying to hear this all day, every day. So we could think about redesigning houses with generative design as well, and to let them float, for instance. You already have a few designs which made it possible to have homes floating like you see here. And there's actually already a first full village that will float in Swansea. And it's called the Dragon-Shaped Island. You should look it up. It's very cool. But what I would like you to take away of generative design is getting future ready means adding or changing specifications to existing products or services in order to thrive in new contexts. And you should, if you want to work with generative design, incorporate design into the conceptual phase of innovation and have it assist your engineers. Don't let it be the compass, have it assist you. And I will give you an example how this could work. Start with a winning aspiration. So what do you actually want to do? Then identify emerging design challenges. What kind of challenges do we see popping up given that aspiration? And then explore actual solutions with or designs with generative design. And always start small. For instance, what you see here is the redesign of the rims of the classic Volkswagen busje, the Volkswagen van. Now, well, as you see in the rim, it's not the normal rim. It's designed with generative design. And the process of Volkswagen, I can imagine, could have looked like something like this. We want to build the most lightweight car in the world. Current design challenge. The wheels of current cars or vans are too heavy for this. And then explore opportunities with generative design. So how can we redesign the wheels or the rims in specific for optimal design, material, and while remaining strength? And get a wheel like this. That was the third lesson already. I discussed 3 with you today. Use DNA structures to store data, learn from birds to improve autonomy, and design by Darwin's principles. We have researched more technologies. They are in an ebook. You will receive it in a few days from now. But the most important I would like you to remember of today is planet Earth is the most successful innovator we have ever seen. Thank you. And back to you, Marco.
Awesome, Pepijn. Thanks. So yeah, people, that's it. I think biomimicry is really important, not only now, but also in the future of technological advancements. I think now it is time for a Q&A. I see a couple of chats already. So, Pepijn, if you would want to join me,
Sure.
and if we can then have the chat open. Are there some chats? All right. Pepijn, what are some other things in the ebook that you've seen that you think are really important or influential?
Well, something I really like, I really like the technology generative design, for instance, as you can come up with an endless new amount of designs. But when you start combining this technology, for instance, with 4D printing,
Right.
when you have a design that also interacts with external factors, then it becomes really interesting, because then you will not only have a new design, but you will also have a design that changes over time as weather conditions change or that kind of stuff. So that's something I think that you should definitely keep an eye on.
Nice.
Yeah.
Are there things in nature that you think we are not there yet, but we try to get towards these kinds of points?
Yeah, definitely. So when you talk about swarms, there's a lot of other things we can learn from swarms as well. I just appointed the nearest neighbor principle, but there are also, we look at bees. Bees are very good in selecting their new homes, actually, and they go on a scout individually, and then they come together again, and they, as a group, as a collective, they make a perfect decision on what's the perfect place for their new home, which is key to their survival. And somehow, and researchers still don't know how they do it, they have a way of come to a final conclusion together with each other and make an optimal decision. And I think that's something we can definitely learn from animals that are way smaller than us, have way smaller brains than we do, but make as complex decisions together.
Yeah, and to add to that, I've seen a lot of research now trying to mimic material making. So, for example, spiderweb.
Yeah.
Spiderweb obviously is super powerful.
Yeah.
It's stretchy. It's elastic.
Yeah.
And we're now trying to find out how we can mimic that, because we don't know how to do it yet.
Yeah.
But we're making some first steps towards that. That's right?
Yeah, true. Yeah, that's very cool. And there's also a technology right now that's called shape-shifting hydrogel, and it's actually based on the skin of an octopus. And it can take any shape you want, and you can keep reshaping it. So, for instance, if I order a new pair of shoes and it comes in a package of shape-shifting hydrogel, it's a box of shoes, but then I can reshape it later to let it be something else. So it's really a big opportunity for us to learn from nature, but also to become more circular when it comes to e-commerce.
Nice.
Yeah.
what are big institutions or universities that you've seen working on this? Are there specific countries? Are there specific universities?
Yeah, you see a lot of universities, mainly in the United States, in China, and in India, that are working on this. And an institution that is, for instance, talking a lot about biomimicry, and actually part of the alliance is the BioTwist. The BioTwist, the biotech company,
Right.
that is more of an institution than it's actually a corporate.
Yeah.
So they are not as big as a player of as Microsoft and Illumina would be, but they are spreading the word of the value of biomimicry. And I think that is as important as current researchers, IBM and other companies are doing.
Nice. We have people from the airline sector here as well. How important has biomimicry been in designing planes?
Yeah, incredibly. I think for starters, to make an actual plane, birds were taken as an example, and now you see more things happening when we are redesigning certain parts of the actual airplane, and for instance the partition part. But another thing you see happening is the fact that we are making synthetic kerosene right now, which actually is copying photosynthesis in an artificial way, because it retracts CO2 from the air and it makes fuel out of it.
How beautiful is
Yeah,
that?
it's crazy.
All right, Brit has a question. Brit, awesome that you're here. What nature strengths are not used yet? I think there's a lot.
Yeah. Well, we have a big ask for demand for energy, and that's growing and growing. But if you look, for instance, at seas, tidal energy is extremely powerful, and we're still not able to leverage that to a full extent. So we're using wind and solar power, as Raoul has mentioned in his previous webinar. But tidal energy is more predictable and it's stronger. So really starting to make use of the strengths Earth has, for maybe even to use earthquakes for your benefit, could be a very interesting way in looking at your growing energy demand, I think.
Yeah. And a project that we're currently working on, or a research paper that we found, is also on storing carbon dioxide out of the air, obviously what trees do.
Yeah.
There are now trees that can store about 5 times more CO2 by manipulating how they are grown. But actually storing carbon dioxide as trees would do, I believe, is something that we should learn a lot from.
Yeah. Imagine that we build skyscrapers or buildings in our city centers that actually retrieve CO2 from our cities. Would be a big impact on our living quality and our air quality as well.
Yeah, and another thing that I've seen is getting water out of the air, dawn out of the air, because there's a lot of fresh water there, but we don't know how to store it yet.
Yeah.
And like I said in the beginning, getting good water or drinkable water is definitely something to improve upon. All right, Rayan, awesome that you are here, all the way out of Belgium, I believe. You talked a bit about how huge tech companies will claim the space of these technologies. I'm wondering how you would start a small company that wants to apply generative design. Where would you start? Is it easy to start with generative design?
Well, I wouldn't say it's that difficult. And as I just mentioned, I mentioned a lot of big companies. They happen to be mostly car manufacturers. So, for instance, Volkswagen. But when you see the example I showed in the end, is showing that you can start with a very specific part. You can start with a thing as little as a rim, or even a screw. So the smaller you start, the less impact it will have if it goes wrong, the less costly it will be, and the easier it is to have an actual algorithm finding a design for you. You can imagine that if you want to design a full, complete house, there are a lot of features going in, and the algorithms has to deal with a lot of rules, so to say. But the less rules, the easier it is for the algorithm. So I would say start simple and start small, and start with something that is not breaking up or ruining your operation when it goes wrong.
Nice. So another thing that you see in biomimicry is trying to make sure that we integrate physical nature. So living things. It's a question from Timo. How do you see that? Integrate living things.
Yeah, that is crazy. They have made I think they have made a living robot last year or 2 years ago, and they actually they took cells from a cloth frog, an African cloth frog, and they made a robot out of it. So this robot is a living organism that you can put in someone's body, for instance, to distribute medicines, but because you can program it. So it's a combination between a programmable device and a living organism.
Beautiful, huh?
Yeah,
it's interesting.
Yeah.
So one of the things that you also see is that we're stretching up nature a little bit. So we're forcing stuff to stretch. Obviously, we are important in changing the environment, and we can actually learn from that. So, for example, Wi-Fi signals and how they go through, and radio signals, how they go through the air. We can actually learn how plants adapt and see how they would then handle that, or handle, for example, energy storage from that.
Yeah.
Do you see some things happening there as well?
Well, yeah, when you think about transmitting signals, I think we can learn a lot, for instance, from whales and dolphins. They are very good in communicating underwater over very long distances with each other. Would be quite interesting to deepen that out more as well.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
What do you hope are next big developments when it comes to biomimicry?
Well, as I mentioned, I'm doing this webinar because of a certain fascination and belief as well. I wanted to show how much nature can offer us, and I firmly hope that at some point our innovations start giving back to nature as well. Because as you mentioned in the beginning, climate change is real. We were just before the webinar, we were discussing that it was 49.5 degrees in Alaska last year. So there are main challenges to actually solve, I hope, with biomimicry. So the circle is round then.
Beautiful, man.
Yeah.
Everybody, these were the last questions. Thanks for being here. I loved having all of you here. We will send you an email with the video recording and the ebook later on. Up until that time, I'd love to invite you for our new webinars, which you will get an email on. And yeah, thanks for being here. Thanks, Pepijn.
Thank you.